Welcome to Householders, a conversation about American life as Zen practice. I'm Inga Annie Wade.
And I'm Kyosaku John Mitchell, and we're lay members of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. We are joined by Taiun Michael Elliston Roshi, known to us as Sensei, when there's no other senseis in the room. And though we know you pretty well, the assumption for our guests is that they don't. So would you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and how you came to be Hojo?
As you said, we have a lot of senseis, and at least in our lineage, when you become a black rober, so-called novice priest, you're given the title sensei. It's just an informal honorific meaning teacher, and it's an affectionate term in Japan. These terms are not used in Japan the way they are used here, is my understanding. And my teachers are Japanese. Matsuoka Roshi came over in 1939. I met him in Chicago when I was doing my graduate work at the Institute of Design there. I was teaching at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, as well as the University of Illinois Chicago Circle campus. I was in my first marriage, and it was pretty much coming apart. So it was a stressful time in my life working in two different universities and trying to manage having two young children and so forth. So when I met Matsuoka Roshi, it was not what I expected. He was just seemed like a normal Japanese businessman. You know, he would suit up in his robes on occasion, but very warm and friendly, and not at all aloof. Then later on, I did further formal training, that is ceremonies, with Seirien Barbara Kohn of the Suzuki lineage and with Shohaku Okamura of the Kodo Sawaki Uchiyama lineage. And Uchiyama and Matsuoka Roshis were both born in 1912. They were the same age. Uchiyama Roshi never left Japan. Matsuoka Roshi did. He came to America in 1939, before the war. And Okamura Roshi agreed to do my formal shiho or transmission ceremony, which means we share the Kodo Sawaki Uchiyama lineage as well as the Matsuoka lineage. And both of them studied under Kodo Sawaki at Komazawa University when they, I think, were in their teens to 20s. I'm not sure what years they were there. So we'd done some research into that, and we followed up on that.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about sort of going off on your own and founding the center here and the journey towards the Silent Thunder Order and where we are today.
Well, yeah, that's what I ended up becoming called Hojo, means abbot instead of sensei, because we have 12 or 15 different kinds of our different centers around the country and in Canada, and we have several students overseas. And it took many years for that to develop. In 1970, I left Chicago to come to Atlanta with a company, a research and design, consumer research and design company that I had worked with on the outside of my teaching responsibilities in Chicago. And 1970, Matsuoka Roshi left Chicago for Long Beach. And so then we had Kongo Roshi, who was my senior Dharma brother at that time. He took over Chicago. So we had Chicago, Long Beach, and Atlanta, kind of the Bermuda Triangle of Zen. Everything goes in, nothing comes out. In the intervening years, for some 30 years till his death in 1997, we had, I would travel there, he would travel here, we would meet up in Chicago, we met in Tokyo. So we had a long distance relationship, teaching relationship. And that's something that you can do in Soto Zen, unlike maybe Rinzai or Tibetan. The relationship to the teacher is not so sort of codependent and devotional. we rely more on Zen meditation. And so the teacher relationship can be more casual, more like a coach coaching you at different times in your progress. Hopefully there's some progress.
So now you're in the position of teaching others to teach, and sort of home base for this lineage as it stands now. And as we often talk about, you and I, but also Annie and I, our Sangha is really a householder practice. Even the people in robes have jobs and families and lives, and sort of seamlessly blend the Zen life with the rest of their life that may not be officially called Zen, but certainly is imbued with Zen in every way. How is that just the value of the lineage that you're in, or is there, how much of that is your attitude?
I think it's partly Matsuoka. He said Zen was dead in Japan. After 900 years, any institution becomes pretty ossified. There's something like 18,000 Soto temples in Japan, so that's how it's like Catholicism in Italy, and some 8,000 Rinzai temples. So he said Zen would see its rebirth in America, and primarily in the form of lay practice. We're not pretend monastics. When we go on longer retreats, we certainly revert to a lot of the monastic practices which were finely honed in the monasteries. So they sort of know how to do everything, and we learn from ancient teachers going back to Master Dogen, 13th century Japan. Primarily, he's our founder, recognized as the founder of Soto Zen in Japan. But we look upon this as lay practice. If it's not for householders, lay people, who's it for? And we think that actually in the history of Zen, you see people like Vimalakirti, Layman Pang in China, and different, householders who became leading luminaries in Zen as well. They were highly admired by the monastic orders because it's considered, in a way, a lot harder to have this kind of insight, you might say, if you're, juggling children and cars and keeping a house from falling down and a couple of careers here and there, and that type of thing that's all Zen practice from our perspective. One of the things that comes up often in Dokusan is, as you guys know, is a private interview where you come and you just sit face to face and talk to the teacher, and you can bring up anything basically in your life that's going on, and they try to coach you from a perspective of Zen. And one of the big things that comes up is work. What's traditionally called right livelihood. How do we make a buck? But beyond that, how do we nurture our life in every dimension? How do we make sure that we're not putting too much emphasis in one area and neglecting another area? How do we balance Zen in our life? And how do we balance our life out? So I think we want to include in the spectrum of things that we address, especially in householder Zen, the whole issue of livelihood. It's become, it's a hot topic. It comes up in almost every Dokusan. The issue of diversity in Zen, as well as everything else, is top of mind in a lot of people's minds. And at the last time I attended a Soto Zen Buddhist Association meeting, these are all the sort of my generation and some earlier, some younger than I, people who are on the formal path of priesthood. At my count, we had 50% women and 50% men there in that particular conference. This was several years ago, there every 2 years. But we go back to Master Dogen's 13th century tract. I believe it is Rai Hai Tokuzui, which means prostrating to the attainment of the marrow, in which he makes the point that if there's a 7-year-old girl who is a Dharma holder, we prostrate to her because she's carrying the Dharma. And at the time, Japan was very misogynistic. They had temples that only men could attend and things like that. So this was kind of a rant and kind of a criticism of these sexist and misogynistic attitudes that existed in Zen at that time. And then fast forward to the World War II, 1945, Dogen's nuns, that is, the successors to his nuns all down through the years, under the lead of one very famous nun, brought a petition to the Parliament of Soto Shu while the bombs were dropping, and saying that the women priests needed to have the same recognition as the men, as Dogen said. And they passed that law. They passed that through their parliament, the Soto Parliament. Now, maybe they say, well, what the hell, everything's falling apart anyway, we may as well. but I take it more as a kind of a compassionate recognition of the justness of that cause. And you read Dogen from 13th century, he sounds like somebody, doing a podcast yesterday on that issue. So I think the audience should know that this is not a boys' club.
Yeah, for sure. That's an issue that we keep pretty top of mind here, and we've had a whole episode about it. And the whole idea of doing a podcast to spread the Dharma, I feel like kind of democratizes and revolutionizes the whole way of not only teaching, but institutionalizing what this is, and doing it in the form of a conversation has served to really kind of open the horizons of what we can talk about.
I think a good thing about what you're doing is you are helping your audience to listen and hear and understand that Zen is for everyone. Maybe not everyone's ready for Zen, but there is no exclusionary type of attitude in Zen. It's very inclusive. And just hearing different people, different genders, different ages, from different walks of life and so forth, I think encourages people to understand that they can take up Zen. It doesn't require that you become a monk or you become a nun or you do something that weird and special, if you like. And that's pretty much one of the threads running through the book.
The idea of writing a book itself is sort of an inherently householder move that I would love to hear about. You with me, you have expressed a lot of reservations about the very idea of Zen books, and in the beginning, the introduction of the book is also about that. And the whole idea of putting Zen into words at all is fraught with risk. But there is a trade-off that has to happen at some point when you can't have people coming into the Dharma hall to be taught face-to-face in order to propagate Zen, where deciding to make a book is a decision to give people Zen in the form that they can have by their bedside or by their toilet, as you said in one of your early talks about the book, as part of their householder life. So you made that compromise, or you decided to make that trade-off in order to do this, to put the teaching into this form. Tell us about how that felt to do.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned in the introduction, I feel a little bit hesitant, to say the least, adding to the babble, the Tower of Babel out there about Zen. And you can't read everything that's been published now, so why add another book? But and I didn't intend to write a book on Zen. It's just over the years, I've been accumulating all of these teachings, and we've recorded a lot of my talks, and so it's sort of all started falling together. And actually, there were people who said, "You got to write the book. You got to write the book. This is the book you got to write. This is the book people need to hear. They need to hear this." So I started accumulating material, as I think most writers do, and I finally pulled it together in what I thought was a pretty comprehensive manuscript, and sent it to the first publisher. We have a connection with a publisher, not the ones who ended up publishing it, but another well-known publisher in the Buddhism niche. And they sent it back and said, we think you've got two books here." So I went in and I looked at it again, and I took it apart. I just took all the references to the place of Zen in society out, and sort of put them into another file. And sure enough, it fell apart into two text manuscripts, which were at that time basically to the page. And the other one, the original Frontier, was more about how do you personally practice, and how do you approach this practice and still live a normal life, etc. So that's a little bit different from the social spectrum. The other one, which is going to be published next, is about the place of Zen in our culture, with the extremes of rationalism or science, on secular reductionism, if you will, at the extreme on one end of the spectrum, theism and religion on the other. Fundamentalism is sort of the extreme of that. And Zen is called the middle way. And so the second book is based on that premise, that Zen is sort of right down the middle of all of these aspects of, we turn to science, we turn to religion in times of stress, and people are finding it doesn't work. And so that book is trying to position Zen in the societal spectrum. This one is more like a personal handbook that you can use as kind of interval training between bouts of sitting, bouts of doing meditation, referring back to the book and so forth. So it's much more, as the subtitle says, a serious seeker's guide to Zen.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can hear the book now. The book has joined us on the podcast, which I think is wonderful. Do you want to give us a little sample of sort of the headings, and we maybe then we can dive into some?
I think it's useful to think of the title, The Original Frontier. The meme there is the American frontier, obviously, just over the next hill, and how we've always been obsessed or fascinated by this idea, the final frontier of space, Star Trek, and all of that. But the original frontier, in this analogy, was discovered by Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago. It's at least that's the first historical record we have of this. We assume that there are many, many prehistoric Buddhas, which is part of the traditional teaching, and that many, many people were self-enlightened over time simply by coming to the same conclusions, findings, conclusions, and so forth that Buddha came to in his experience. So the original frontier is about entering this frontier of mind. It's not a geographical boundary. No matter where you are in space-time, the original frontier is still here with you. And you can enter into it, but like a frontier, it requires leaving behind the familiar, entering into uncharted territory, and so forth. So that particular model, I think, is very easy to understand. But what the book tries to do is describe a little bit of this adventure, a little bit of this exploration, what it's like when things actually do start changing for you and you do start entering unknown territory. The great Buddha's ancestors, teachers, India, China, Japan, and so forth, sort of blazed the trail for us, and they sent back reports of what it's like and how you have to cope, how to negotiate, how to navigate. So the chapters are like introducing the original frontier, where I go into that, then designing a creative Zen life. I come from a creative background, as I mentioned, and I see Zen meditation as sort of the heart of creativity, and I explain why I feel that way in the book. Then the third chapter is differentiating Zen meditation from all the others. We now have an embarrassment of riches. We have Zen being co-opted to sell cosmetics. People have a difficult time, I think, understanding the irreducibly simple form of meditation that is Zen's excellent method, to use Dogen's term. So we teach a method, just as if you would be teaching piano. You can't teach music, but you can teach a person how to play the piano, and it eventually can become music. The Zen meditation is more like that. It's like the method that I learned in Bauhaus training and design, and a method of immersion, total immersion. Then the next chapter is finding workarounds for your lousy excuses. And this has to do with, all the reasons we can't do this. I don't have time. It hurts, all the different ones. And so that goes piece by piece, sort of short little headlined snippets, and then it says, try this at the end of each one of them. If this is what you think your problem is, try this next time, or try this, see if this works.
It's like troubleshooting guide.
It's a troubleshooting guide, and I make the point that the literature in Buddhism or Zen is like the documentation for a computer application. If it doesn't make any sense if you're not using the application. But if you're using the application, meditation, Zen meditation, then it can work to help you find workarounds for glitches you run into. A person like me is kind of like a coach, or I'm kind of like an online techie. You know, I talk to about 30 people a week.
Tech support.
Right. So yeah, that metaphor, I think, holds, that analogy. Then the next one is deconstructing your senses in the most natural way. And this gets into what I think actually starts to happen in a sensory way when we just sit still enough, long enough. All of the senses begin to habituate or adapt and begin to break down, and we begin to see through their sort of interface, if you will. We start seeing through the interface of our own senses with the world. People report just simple things like light, color, movement where there shouldn't be any, right? Sounds that we never heard before. Where are those sounds coming from? Sensations in the body, stuff like that. So that's the longest chapter in the book, deconstructing your senses, because it addresses the senses the way we run into them in Zen, not the way eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind is the usual order. But actually, most people run into body right away. You start sitting as in body, pain, resistance. And usually after body comes mind, thinking. The so-called monkey mind becomes the next barrier. So I array them by their level of difficulty. A little different approach. Then embracing non-duality without losing your grip on reality. So that gets a little bit more into the non-duality, the philosophical side of it, not too deeply, but in a way that I think anybody can begin to understand. Then applying Zen to your life by applying your life to Zen. Most people come in, they say, I know I've heard and read about Zen. I think it can help me live my life better. It can help me be a better person, so forth. And we say, that's a little too early. Don't worry, just apply yourself to Zen. A little too soon, right? And eventually it will apply itself to your life in a natural way. If you try to do it intentionally, you're probably going to screw it up. So then benefiting from Zen in every way imaginable. So this goes into all of the short-term, long-term benefits that I think it has for us and for society. Then following the sages as guides to the frontier of Zen, and that touches a little bit on some of the ancestral teachings and how they relate to this concept of the frontier, including Zen as if that were possible and so forth, and then a little bit more on the original frontier, more implications at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. So it's basically an exhortation for you to practice or to be re-inspired about your practice or to begin practice if you haven't started and so forth.
It sounds like a lot of very down-to-earth, relatable content that anybody within their practice could benefit from, whether they're just starting or if they've been meditating for a while.
That's the idea. When the publisher first said, who's the audience? I had a hard time. Basically everybody.
Anybody who's interested.
Anybody who can read.
And the first chapter you said is about creativity, and I know that Kiyosaku and I are both creative individuals as well. And your paintings are just gorgeous. I love seeing those. So I think that it's also attracted a lot of creative individuals to the Sangha, the Silent Thunder Order, and the Elena Soto Zen Center. It seems like we have cultivated a big group of creatives in general, and I know that a lot of people who even listen to this podcast fit into that category too. What is the connection between Zen and creativity?
Well, the cleanest one that I can come up with, or have come up with, the most direct one, is that in creative circles, we say one way we define creativity is making the familiar strange. So you tune into the Super Bowl each year, to watch the game, but people rave about the commercials. They're selling you the same old beer and the same old cars, right? It's nothing new in terms of the content, but it's the way they do it. It's the way the creatives and the advertising agencies make it funny, they make it memorable, they make another point about the product, and that's the creativity. It's not the content, but what you do with it. And so, and also in creativity, we say we don't create anything; we just rearrange what's already there. Like the four elements: earth, wind, fire, and water. You just rearrange everything. So, if you think about it, the most familiar thing that you have is your own consciousness, your own awareness. It's been with you since you 2, 3 years old, and you started becoming self-aware and looking around. And from in your own mind, you're still the same person that you were then. You can see the continuity. Nobody else can see it because they see you, how you look now and how you look then, and how much you changed and so forth. So if you think about the process of immersion, that in the Bauhaus you work in oil paint, watercolor, metals, stone, clay, wood, and you use all kinds of tools and processes. It's just all immersion until you get to the point through sensory learning that you know how wood behaves. You know what it can do and what it cannot do. So you're not going to design a table or a chair out of wood that's going to break. It's not going to work. So that's the basic idea of the Bauhaus was established to kind of humanize the outputs of the Industrial Revolution, which were pretty sharp-edged and not very ergonomic and so forth in the beginning. So if you look at Zen meditation that way, and when I first started sitting with Matsuoka Roshi in Chicago in the middle 60s, I recognized Zazen as another immersion process. But what you're becoming fully immersed in is your own mind, your body, mind, consciousness. You're not using an external medium such as paint or, some other medium. So you're pushing the envelope of your own consciousness, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. And when the sutra goes on to say, given emptiness, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, that illustrates just how extreme the change becomes. So the connection with creativity, I think, is that making the familiar strange. The most familiar thing you have is your own self-awareness, your mind. And sitting in Zazen, it becomes surpassingly strange.
I love talking about this change of perception in general. I just think it's quite fascinating, and I think people try to land at that change of perceptions through substances and stuff. And I think there could be some people that even come to Zen with the idea like maybe I'll have like some sort of like weird drug experience or something like that.
Which many
I know some people like that.
of us do. It was the 60s in Chicago, and I was in my 20s. That should tell you all you need to know.
But then when it comes down to it, I guess that could just become another attachment in itself. And that's your last chapter in the book, or I think it was your last one about the or second to last about the changing perceptions of that you experience while you're in Zen. How do you touch on those things without making it some sort of like this exciting like journey of trippiness or something?
Well, it is, but we balance that kind of enthusiasm with wisdom and patience. You have to gain a lot of patience with yourself, and the cushion in your monkey mind drive you nuts. And if you fight it, it becomes a 600-pound gorilla. You lose that battle. So you have to become very patient. And becoming patient with yourself, you're patient with others. I think I can close with a quote from Dogen, where he says in this long tract, I believe it was Jiju Zanmai, he goes through this beautiful description. He said, the entire sky turns into enlightenment, and the endless, unremitting, unthinkable, unnameable Buddha Dharma, all that kind of thing. Very poetic and beautiful. But then he throws a bucket of cold water and he said, all this, however, does not appear within perception, because it is unconstructedness and stillness. It is immediate realization. So the way I think about it is it's not an object of perception, but so to speak, it comes from under or from behind, and it changes perception, which is the expression Annie used. So I think that's a much more cogent and true expression. It actually changes your perception.
Folks, the book is The Original Frontier. It's available in all the usual places. You can find it on the ASDC website. You can find it on Amazon and all those kinds of things. And of course, there will be a very convenient link in the podcast show notes as well. Thank you, Sensei, so very much for joining us. And we hope you will be back soon for some other scintillating topic or perhaps a future book.
May you be well. And thank you very much. I really appreciate what you're doing.
Householders is a production of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Silent Thunder Order. Find us on the web ataszc.org.
Our Sangha depends on your support. You can donate by PayPal to donate at storder.org. Gasho.